Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bassam Haddad. I am the director of the Middle East and Islamic Studies program, and I am delighted to share with you today a very interesting and compelling book talk by Ali Riza Gungen, who is joining us now to address a very important topic, which is the politics of debt in Turkey, the politics of debt and financial inclusion in Turkey. And we are delighted to have him join us. We will have a presentation for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then we will take some questions and answers. Before I read Professor Gungen's bio, I would like to welcome you. Ali, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks
It's
for
very
having
nice.
me.
It's very nice to have you join us, and I am delighted that you had the time. One of the things about Turkey that a lot of people do not know is its internal affairs. A lot of things that are happening internally in Turkey, including some Middle East specialists. We know about Turkey in the world, in the Middle East, but we are very eager to hear from you what is going on in this dimension inside Turkey. But first, if you don't mind, I would like to introduce you. I just would like to say first that this event is part of the MEIS podcast. It's part of a series of podcasts that we have all year at the MEIS program at George Mason University, and we hope that we actually will have another event on Turkey next semester, as well as a number of other events. We also have another podcast called Search Files coming up, which you see in the background, which is about knowledge production on the Middle East, coming up in November. And we will share more about this on the website meis.gmu.edu. That is meis.gmu.edu. Let me introduce now our fantastic guest and Professor Ali Riza Gungen. I'm sure I am massacring the pronunciation, but please correct me. He is a political scientist working as a visiting assistant professor at York University. His research focuses on dependent financialization, state transformations, and public banks in the global south. His articles appeared in the Journal of Peasant Studies and New Political Economy, and he published extensively on the political economy of the emerging economies. Dr. Güngen co edited the 2019 book, The Political Economy of Financial Transformation in Turkey, published by Routledge, and is the co-author of Financialization, Debt Crisis and Collapse: The Future of Global Capitalism in Turkey. It's in Turkish, this book. His new book, which he is addressing today, is Politics of Debt, Financial Inclusion in Turkey, which was published in 2021, also in Turkish. So I would like to welcome Ali. Can I call you Ali?
Yeah, sure, sure.
Okay, to our program, and the floor is yours. Please feel free to deliver your presentation, and if there are questions via the MEIS Facebook page or Jadalia's Facebook page, which is also broadcasting this book talk, then I will share them with you afterwards and we'll have a discussion.
Thank you. So let me first start by saying thank you for inviting me to this talk. I'd like to thank the Middle East Studies Association, also the Middle East and Islamic Studies program at George Mason University, and the Arab Studies Institute. Um, Thank you. So let me start by sharing my screen. Just give me a moment. Um, yes, so I believe that now viewers are seeing my slides. Yeah. So I divided my talk into three parts. In the first part, I will give the context of financial inclusion in general and the financial inclusion idea in Turkey. Then in the second part, I will try to explain the rise of household indebtedness in Turkey in the 21st century, and how the monitoring household debt became a common concern for the policymakers. And finally, in the final part, I will highlight the controversies arising from what we can call the politics of debt in Turkey. So this is an exciting story for me. It moves from an unprecedented support given to a political party to some marketing agents promoting financial literacy workshops, from Kurdish women repeating microfinance slogans in a language that they didn't know, to some conservative Turkish ministers requesting wealthy middle classes to buy houses. So I will try to keep it short. So maybe I will use 35 minutes. I don't know. I will try. So let's start with the concept of financial inclusion and how it was conceived in the early 2010s. Um, Financial inclusion basically means the removal of barriers against accessing financial services. It promotes reducing commissions, improving financial infrastructure, increasing financial education, and helping citizens organize their future, relying on accessible financial services. The mainstream narrative about the inclusion process was that the debt could be beneficial for the borrower. It suggests that the removal of barriers against access to finance would work as an efficient tool to overcome social exclusion. So institutions such as World Bank portray financial literacy as crucial for uh, converting consumers into investors and entrepreneurs. So according to this perspective, the lack of market benefit is an outcome of the exclusion, and financial inclusion will provide a remedy and help the fight against poverty in the global south. Of course, there are some troubling aspects of this perspective, and it stems mainly from the promotion of financial inclusion as a way of protecting citizens. Now, a growing number of lower income households may have become financial consumers in due course. I mean, they are, as a result of the financial inclusion policies, they are now accessing financial services, and some were swiftly included in the debt markets in the 2010s. And it provides an opportunity for some households to smooth their consumption and expenditure. But that comes with more risks than opportunities. In crisis times, and we have seen this in so many places, like households not only use their savings but also borrow more, and it creates an incredible burden. I'm here referring to mainly the households in general, but let me, of course, add a footnote here. Feminist political economists have taught us that the debt was something gendered. So, of course, we should not ignore the unequal power relations within the household. Financial inclusion was popularized by experts and international financial institutions as an effective tool to mitigate poverty in the 21st century. And World Bank played a massive role in shaping the policy agenda. And it was mainly G20 and the Alliance for Financial Inclusion which gave its most effective push in the early 2010s. So, as a side note, Alliance for Financial Inclusion is an international policy network whose members are institutions, and it drafted the Maya Declaration, and it was signed by over 100 countries in the early 2010s. So those signatories committed themselves to reducing financial services costs, providing reliable data for informed policymaking, and searching ways to protect financial consumers. So this was like a milestone in the financial inclusion agenda, not just because of the number of signatories, but also it was a symbol of the regulatory approach. The international financial institutions and international policy networks provide the countries with significant targets, but leaves the rest to the policymakers and the financial sector representatives in most of the cases. As a result of this popular notion of financial inclusion, many policymakers and many states adopted financial inclusion framework in the 2010s. So designing financial education programs, producing strategy documents, promoting savings accounts, reforming pension systems were all part of these financial inclusion processes. Now I believe we can move on to Turkey's political economy and the chronic problems of Turkish economy. So Turkish economy basically suffers from chronic current account deficits. At least it was the case up until the 2018-2019 currency crisis and the recent months. So the corporations need cheap funds to manage their liabilities, and as in many other emerging economies, when global financial conditions tighten, it becomes increasingly complex for the market actors to roll over their debt. In the late 20th century, the remedy was, of course, for the policymakers to liberalize the economy, financially liberalize the economy, but it created a kind of a boom-bust pattern in the 1990s and the 21st century. So Turkish economy, it would not be an exaggeration to suggest that Turkish economy experiences a couple of years of growth accompanied by high current account deficits, then the fragility in the financial system or changing global financial conditions. It triggers economic turbulence and results in capital outflows, followed by huge busts. So this happened several times in the last 3 decades. And what we observe is that the bust continues for a couple of quarters, maybe a year, but then a new cycle starts, and it is stimulated by new capital inflows. So this is basically, of course, the story of not Turkey, but also some other emerging economies. But there was a striking development in the 2000s in Turkey, and it is the growth of the household debt. So, so many global South countries enjoyed consumer credit expansion in the early 21st century, and Turkey was one of them. And it was extraordinary given the Turkish ratios. From around 2%, the consumer loans jumped to approximately 13% of the gross domestic product in just a decade. This is still a low ratio when compared with some other countries from the global south, some other countries or some other countries of the emerging economies. But Turkey has been a country with one of the highest interest rates in its region. Despite, if we exclude just a couple of years, Turkey has been one of those countries with the highest interest rates. So it's also striking. So yeah, basically in the 21st century, and this is the story of also the success of the Justice and Development Party. In the post 2001 period, the banking sector was restructured thanks to the dollar glut in the international financial markets. Turkey was able to decrease the interest rates, and it became easier for households to borrow. The financial conditions and the IMF program paved the way for a quick recovery in the early 2000s. And Justice and Development Party succeeded in controlling public debt. They also increased the social expenditures when compared to the 1990s. So the ratio of public social spending increased also in the early 2000s. And the consumption capacity of low-income groups increased not because of real wage increase, but rather because of the credit opportunities, the expanded credit opportunities. So the increase was more notable in the first 10 years of Justice and Development Party governments. So by the time financial inclusion became a popular development tool in the 2000s and of course in the early 2010s, Turkish authorities were concerned with the increased household indebtedness. So it is within this conjuncture financial inclusion was adopted in the Turkish context. So I prefer to implement a three-pillar strategy of research, analyzing the processes of financial inclusion. The first one is the strategy formation itself. The agents supporting the financial inclusion strategy, the prominent supporters behind the programs. So in some countries, for example, it is mainly the state and the policymakers. But in others, there is a coalition of state and financial institutions. And in some other cases, for example, in some African countries, the technology firms and financial technology firms and multinational banks played leading roles. So the second pillar is the financial literacy campaigns or financial education. These have been at the heart of financial inclusion processes, and we might trace back the organization of campaigns, how they are organized, who were the sponsors, who were the beneficiaries, did they have an impact on increased access to financial services. So these may be the questions on that front. And the final pillar is the role of microfinance. So, of course, microfinance practices were influential in the formation of the financial inclusion discourse in the beginning. and it basically microfinance basically promises to make the credit beneficiaries new investors, to create new investors out of them, by creating self-responsible entrepreneurs out of disadvantaged groups. And in this third pillar, of course, we should ask what kind of changes occurred during the spread of microfinance programs, and how was this microfinance program or programs were organized. So these are the questions we might seek answers to analyze this transformation. And let me briefly explain the Turkish context here. The strategy of financial inclusion was drafted by mainly, of course, policymakers, and it was drafted following the Turkish state's financial apparatus becoming a part of the international policy networks. So, for example, Turkish Treasury joined the Alliance for Financial Inclusion. Capital Markets Board of Turkey joined those meetings. Central Bank of Turkey sent representatives to those meetings, and the timing was also crucial because the strategy was announced in 2014, right after the household debt peaked. So there was no significant contribution from non-governmental actors in writing the strategy, in forming the strategy, except the financial sector representatives. So this is an important aspect, and partly because of this fact, the strategy document did not problematize the financial sector fees and commissions. So this was reducing fees and commissions was a popular element of the international debate in the early 2010s. But in the Turkish context, the strategy resembled the proposals of financial sector representatives. So it basically focused on financial education and financial literacy. And there has been a plethora of financial literacy campaigns in Turkey before and after the announcement of the official financial inclusion strategy. So in most cases, these financial literacy campaigns were led by commercial banks and their affiliate non-governmental organizations. Week-long education programs full of seminars and some workshops characterized these campaigns, but some were more ambitious in terms of their targets. So before summarizing the third pillar, the microfinance aspect, I want to give an example by explaining one of these campaigns, the Financial Expert of the House campaign. So this started in 2015, and the campaign lasted for 3 years. So I'm sharing a full-page interview with the Mastercard Turkey director published in 2016. The partners of the Financial Literacy Association, the face of the campaign was Financial Literacy Association, and in this campaign, the partners of the association were Social Security Institution, Mastercard Turkey, and a women empowerment network that goes with the name Turkish Win. So let me read this part from my book. Just give me a second. So, Financial Expert of the House campaign had the target of financially educating 100,000 women in 3 years. The campaign was a corporate social responsibility project for Mastercard, a step to reduce informal female employment for Social Security Institution, a sisterhood and women empowerment project for Turkish Win. One can ask, is it possible for the initiative, for the campaign, to wear all these hats simultaneously? According to the representative of Turkish Win, and I quote, since women spent 90% of the money that they receive for the household, end of quote, women empowerment initiatives would eventually empower the Turkish households. Indeed, as in many other financial literacy campaigns, this was a fluid enterprise that different actors could market according to their branding needs. We can understand how it went for the state, the Financial Services Corporation, and the NGOs by reviewing the successes. The online education programs are not continued, though they were supposed to. The YouTube channel of the campaign has 5 subscribers, me included. The target was to provide 100,000 women with financial education, but the latest video suggests only 5,000 women received education during the campaign. What is certain is that there was no impact assessment of the campaign and education programs. No one measured or was even able to measure the apparent failure or success. One of the fundamental elements of the campaign was to fight against informal employment and hence informal finance, whereas no one thought of intensifying state monitoring. Project managers insisted that the partnership would fight against informal employment. However, one campaign would not be enough to resolve the structural problems of the Turkish labor markets. So of course, some might suggest that not all financial education programs were as disgraceful as the financial expert of the house campaign. There are some differences, and some of the campaigns or some of the credit campaigns, I mean, they have their impact assessment, but we have every reason, as I tried to explain, we have every reason to be skeptical about the content and the outcomes of financial education conducted by the partnership of the banks, financial services corporations, state, and the NGOs. So let me move on to the third pillar. I should say a few things about microfinance in Turkey. The Turkish microcredit sector is still mainly organized by state, and it's controlled by an association, a vakıf. The name of the most extensive program is Turkey Gramen Microfinance Program. So Turkey's Waste Reduction Foundation, in collaboration with the Gramen Bank, provided most of the microcredit in the 21st century. The program was extending credit to over 50,000 women annually in the mid-2010s. So we do not see, and probably we won't see because of the nature of the program, we won't see microfinance crisis or microcredit crises in Turkey. But we lack those long-term studies that can provide us with the picture, the impact of microcredit. And more importantly, despite the presentation of microfinance as the seed money of various enterprises, the research shows that many women use the credit opportunity to smooth their consumption. So, for example, and this is well documented by some research on microcredit, some Kurdish women joined these meetings, the microfinance meetings, and repeated the slogan of the microfinance program: discipline, unity, courage, and hard work, in Turkish, though they did not know the language. Then some used the money to pay for the wedding expenses of their children and paid back the credit in 40 weeks. Of course, this is just an example I use to explain the gap between the target of the microfinance program and the actual use of microcredit. But in our concern, the important aspect is that this program extends credit to thousands and thousands of women, and also strives to convert them into account holders, into financial consumers. So this is an important aspect of the financial inclusion process in Turkey. Now, let me try to wrap up my talk. So the outcome of the financial inclusion strategy announced in 2014 and according to the strategy document that was supposed to continue for 5 years, the outcome is not well known or well discussed in Turkey. Of course, we see the similar elements repeated in some strategy documents published by the Turkish presidency, published in the 5-year development plan, and so on and so forth. But we need to be, in a way, evaluating the outcomes. So the global Findex data that is compiled by World Bank suggests that Turkish population is now more integrated into the financial system in the late 2010s when compared to the early 21st century or early 2010s. So more people are using financial services, despite the stagnation of the household debt to GDP ratio in the mid-2010s. So one striking development, of course, is the increase of account owners. The ratio of account owner women to total adult female population jumped from 32% in 2011 to 54% in 2017. Now, as a result of the regulations and some state programs, more people have savings in the banks. But the data also shows that at the same time, more people than ever have become indebted in the late 2010s. So this was the case right before the COVID-19 pandemic. So this creates a kind of a credit dependency. And this is one of the major problems with the financial inclusion process in Turkey. Justice and Development Party attempted to reimpose financial discipline on households and small and medium-scale enterprises during and after the crisis in the late 2010s. So there emerged a shift in the Turkish context as well. And the shift is not parallel to the financial technology emphasis made by World Bank and the international financial institutions in recent years. Instead, it was more related to the slow drift of Turkish economy into crisis in the late 2010s. So the strategy of debt-led growth or credit-led accumulation, we might suggest, that worked in the 2000s did not function in the mid-2010s and late 2010s. So what we see is that the repetition of credit campaigns, and Turkish public banks are used to provide supportive credits, especially in the turbulent times of the late 2010s. Policymakers knew that if the credit money disappeared, the crunch or the crisis of the Turkish economy would be more profound, and it would be more difficult for the Erdogan administration to maintain the broad alliance that was formed in the early 21st century. So what we see is that the authorities repeatedly announce some credit campaigns, and they are not always successful. Let me give an example from the credit campaign in 2018. The name of the campaign and I'm sharing the picture from the press conference. The name of the campaign is Time for Investment in Turkey. Then the Urban and Environment Minister calls for real estate investment under this campaign. And I'm quoting his words in the press conference. Real estate always gains value. I cannot think of a scenario in which citizens lose money in this campaign. This campaign is vital with regards to adding value to the construction sector and to the country. it bothers some people. In our country, which suffered from the Gezi rebellion, December 1725 probe, and economic siege, the national unity, this national mobilization bothers some people. It will continue bothering them. Today is not about gaining, it's about sacrifice. So on that day, within the press conference, in just under a minute, the minister went from material gain to sacrifice. So I wanted to quote this part to highlight two aspects. First, under crisis circumstances, Turkey parted ways with the international discussion. So there was shift in the international policy debate in the late 2010s, emphasizing more and more the use of financial technology and some nudging techniques, the concepts of behavioral economics, to in a way to make this transformation more efficient. But in Turkish case, we see a shift towards to another direction. The credit dependency assumed such importance in Turkey that the Erdogan administration frequently used credit campaigns and tried to navigate across the troubled waters of the Turkish economy. So the main mechanism they use is to extend naive and relatively cheap credit to the large sections of society, postponing the crisis, a sort of postponement. But at the same time, what you see is that, I mean, these credit campaigns are not that successful to the extent desired by the policymakers. So let me end this section by saying financial inclusion strategy created a euphoria of financial expansion in Turkey, and it was a timely adoption for the Justice and Development Party, implementation for the Justice and Development Party. They attempted to self-responsibilize people, and at the same time, they attempted to increase the customer base of the commercial banks, commercial Turkish banks. But the outcome is increased, deepened credit dependency. So credit dependency can be maintained if lower interest rates prevail. So I suggest that the Turkish financial inclusion process showed significant weaknesses in two major ways. The first one is the increased access to financial services does not necessarily increase the savings ratio within a country. So what we observe in Turkey is the debt-led growth, debt-led accumulation strategy in the early 2000s, and each time the economy stagnates or suffers from lower capital inflows, the Justice and Development Party, and later from 2018 onwards, Erdogan administration pushed for new credit campaigns, making it easier for the households to postpone their problems. And the pandemic era response was the same. So Turkey gave fiscal and social support to the citizens that goes over 10% of its GDP. But when we analyze the elements of this support, what we see is that the cheap loans were the biggest part of those supports. Cheap loans provided to households and cheap loans provided to small and medium enterprises, and of course debt restructuring programs. And the second major problem with the financial inclusion process is that it was promoted as a tool of empowering women. The gender divisions in the Turkish labor markets were not problematized at all. On the contrary, most of the campaigns identified women as representatives of their households. So it indeed intensified the gendered character of the household debt under the pretext of creating financial experts of the household. So Justice and Development Party governments wanted to consolidate their support among women without problematizing the gendered and racialized divisions within the labor market structure and the social relations. So let me, end my talk here. Um, these are the two main problems with the financial inclusion process in Turkey. So, inviting masses into the financial sector, organizing financial literacy campaigns, um, and expecting people to rebuild themselves as entrepreneurs um, can provide support to an entrepreneurial mentality. Still, it cannot solve the challenging problems faced by low-income groups, women, and minorities. So I suggest, and this was like the final chapter of my book as well. Only a pro-public approach to financial inclusion can take steps in the right direction. So there is this need for portraying access to finance as a public issue, as a public problem, and find some ways to provide financial services on an equitable basis, using public financial institutions and reclaiming public financial institutions, so that we can, in a way, use some mechanisms to fight against those problems. But as long as um, we observe those financial literacy campaigns or market-based financial inclusion approach, as it was the case in Turkey, I mean, what we will see is the increased, reinforced credit dependency. So yeah, that's all for my talk. I'll be happy to answer your questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gungen. And if you can do a good service to me and to everybody in the audience, if you can let us know how are we supposed to pronounce your name so um, I don't mess up
Ali
again.
Ali, Ali Rıza Güngen.
Ali Riza Gungen. It's the last one.
Yeah, yeah,
Gungen. Okay. So the
yeah, yeah.
dots, some of the dots sometimes confuse me. I apologize. So Ali Riza Gungen. Okay. So I wasn't doing such a bad job. Thank you
No, it
very,
was it was perfect. Thank you.
thank you very much for this presentation and a discussion of the inner workings of that political economy, as well as the questions of inclusion that you addressed. We have actually, I don't know, for some reason, people have sent me personally some questions and not on Facebook. But either way, I have my own question, but I first will pose a couple of questions that I received personally, and they are a bit more straightforward than the complexity of your presentation. Basically, and as you might guess, they're also interested in the politics of this. One of them shares, and I will paraphrase. We have heard so much about the ups and downs in Turkey in terms of its economics since the onset of the Erdogan era. And the question is, what is the relationship between the politics of centralization in Turkey that increased recently, and I'm paraphrasing, and the question of economic growth or slowdown.
So that is actually one of the hot topics discussed for, like, I guess, for the last 5 or 6 years in Turkey. And the main argument from coming from some institutionalist and liberal political economists is that there is this increased centralization or growing authoritarianism in Turkey in the 2010s, and this, in a way, this resulted in lower and lower levels of capital inflows to the country. intensifying the economic problems of the Turkish corporations and leading to lower levels of growth. I believe from my perspective, this is rather a simplified way of putting things. It's for sure that Turkey has been suffering from lower levels of capital inflows in the last 2 to 3 years, and it's really hard for these Turkish corporations to roll over their US dollar denominated debt. And it's for sure that the Turkish economy now records incredibly lower rates of growth. But we need to put those developments in context. So some of the problems are well known to the scholars of Turkish political economy, as they were pretty much similar to the ones in the 1990s. And just there was this interesting period in the early 2000s, which in a way strengthened the Justice and Development Party, and paved the ground for this increasing authoritarianism. And it is the early 2000s, actually. The early 2000s provided a window of opportunity for the Justice and Development Party to, in a way, and it expanded the policy space of those policymakers. But at the same time, if you are talking about the problems of Turkish corporations, it once again goes back to the early 2000s and the response given in the 2008-2009 international financial crisis. It's because of the fact that they were allowed to borrow in US dollars in 2009. Now they are suffering from debt problems. Or if you are talking about the credit dependency resulting in increased poverty of masses, then it is once again the early 2000th century, early 2000s, early 21st century. It's the dramatic increase of the household debt resulting in a kind of a credit dependency in the late 2010s and this economic problems. So, of course, Turkey suffers from an authoritarian regime, and the increasing centralization, the one-man rule, as suggested by many, makes things worse. But at the same time, there is this context, and the story goes back to the 1980s and 1990s, and the alleged successful period of Justice and Development Party, the early 21st century, is responsible for most of the troubles that are now being faced by the Turkish economic actors. So that's my way of putting it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now you can hear me. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for this. Another question is more straightforward and simple, and it's how does Turkey compare to other regional or developing countries in terms of this relationship between debt and matters of inclusion, social justice, or any sort of variables that connect with the question of economic growth.
So it's very similar to the other global South countries or other emerging countries. And that is the one of the striking aspects of financial inclusion strategies. So the sudden jump or dramatic increase in the household indebtedness, it was almost it almost started simultaneously in the late 1990s and early 21st century in many global South countries. So Turkey shares the same trajectory in that sense. And in most of the cases, the increase in household debt either slowed down or the household debt to GDP ratio started to stagnate in 2010s, in mid 2010s, in most of the global South countries. So in terms of the data and the transformation, there is a similar story there. But the specificity is and of course we need to be in a way comparing Turkey with other countries, but we need to be investigating case by case to do that. But the specificity from my perspective is that the microfinance sector is very effective in this, how shall I say, in creating a sort of credit dependency in low income groups. And the other aspect is that the prominence of financial sector representatives, commercial banks. In a lot of other cases as well, the commercial bank representatives of commercial banks were very influential in the formation of financial inclusion strategies. But it's really obvious, and they had the really upper hand in drafting the strategy and shaping this process in the 2010s. So I believe these are like slight differences or nuances. But other than that, when we observe this financial transformation, financial deepening, increased household indebtedness in the first decade of the 21st century, but not to that extent in the second decade, it's pretty much similar to other global South countries and other countries of the region.
Thank you so much for this answer, Ali. Ali, you guys say Ali, you don't say the A. I don't know why you took the A out. It's beautiful. Uh, I always joke around with my colleague Hossein Yilmaz at George Mason about these things. So we have two questions. We have 8 minutes and two questions from our dear friend, the political economist, journalist par excellence, Wael Gamal from Egypt. And I will read them to you. They are on Facebook. What do you think of cooperative finance solutions that could be more democratic approach, that could be a more democratic approach to inclusion? And second, how do you think regional and international finance is playing into these developments? And he basically shares a comment, a compliment. Many thanks for the inspiring presentation.
Thank you for these. I mean, it's really good to hear. So I believe that, and that was like the last sentences of my talk. So we need a pro-public approach to financial inclusion. And so yes, the cooperative financial institutions or reclaimed, restructured public financial institutions are key, are crucial to achieve that. So it's easy to criticize the ongoing financial transformation from a rather isolated perspective, but I mean, this is a serious problem faced by millions and millions of people within Turkey, but also within the region. So we need to be thinking about alternative uses of financial institutions, and of course, building some alternative mechanisms. So cooperative finance can work, but I'm much more interested in democratizing the public financial institutions, the public banks. So despite all this transformation and the privatization campaigns all across the board in the 1990s and 21st century, we still have incredibly strong public banks in the global south, in Turkey, and of course in the Middle East. So we need to be finding ways to control those public institutions and change their mandates so that they serve public, not the corporations, not the policymakers. Sometimes, of course, they're corrupt initiatives, but rather they should be under the control of people, and we need to be discussing about the mechanisms to restructure and democratize those financial institutions. And but the international finance and international financial institutions may provide one of the biggest challenges in doing that. So there is this interesting increasing interest in public financial institutions, public banks in the last decade or so. But what we observe is that this interest is rather not about restructuring public banks, but rather using those financial institutions to minimize the risks of public-private partnerships, to minimize or to socialize the risks of private finance. So this is the how shall I say? This is the discourse. This is the trope that we hear from international financial institutions in roughly, once again, 5 or 6 years. They recognize the importance of public financial institutions or public financial capacity, but they argue, most of the experts, most of the reports argue for mobilizing this public financial capacity to socialize the risks of private finance. So that's not the way to go. And so I'm happy to in a way hear this question. So that's what we need to do, and this will contribute not just addressing the needs of millions and millions of people, but this is one of the crucial ways to imagine democratization in Turkey and in the region. So that's my perspective.
Thank you, uh, Professor Gungen, for these enlightening responses, as well as for a remarkable presentation on a very important topic. For me, as somebody who's interested in political economy, this is the kind of thing that I feel is crucial to understanding what's going on in the country. Unfortunately, these sorts of topics are not discussed as much, or are considered too technical, but they're not technical. This is politics. And
Mm-hmm.
this is why we are very excited that we had the pleasure and fortune to have you with us. And we would love to have you back again. We might actually work on a panel with a comparative panel with different economists and political economists addressing the experiences of various cases. And I will invite my friend, my dear friend and colleague, Wael Gamal from Egypt to join this panel. And I will actually try to work on it for the spring 2022
Wonderful,
semester. Absolutely. We
wonderful.
were with Professor Ali Riza Gungen, who is a political scientist and visiting assistant professor at York University. This was a remarkable presentation on the politics of debt and financial inclusion in Turkey. Ali, thank you for joining us. And
Thank you.
I
It
hope,
was my pleasure.
absolutely, and I hope we can see you again.
Thank you.
Salam.